Imagine a world where nonsense ruled the airwaves, where songs about dancing chickens, homesick campers, and screaming madmen didn't just exist. They topped the charts. How could something so absurd capture the attention of millions?
Hello, mother. Hello, father. Here I am at Sonata.
How could a song that made no sense at all climb to #1? In the 1960s, the hits weren't always beautiful, serious, or even coherent. Some were absurd, some were shocking, and some were so ridiculous that they shouldn't have worked. Yet, they did. Today, we're diving into 10 joke songs from the 1960s that defied logic, captivated millions, and changed the way the world listened. Prepare to hear the hits that made no sense, but made history anyway. To number 10, Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini. At number 10 is a song with a title so long, it took up half the radio airtime just to announce it.
Only because we knew this fellow was going to be with us, the fellow who has the song about the bikini, which incidentally called the Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny, Brian Hyland.
In the summer of 1960, a 16-year-old kid from Queens named Brian Hyland changed the music landscape with a song about swimwear. Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini told the story of a shy girl too embarrassed to be seen in her new two-piece bathing suit. The title alone was an event. Radio DJs had to catch their breath just to say it. The origin story is almost too perfect to be true. Songwriter Paul Vance got the idea while watching his 2-year-old daughter at the beach. She was wearing a tiny bikini and kept hiding behind her mother, too shy to come out where anyone could see her. Vance saw a song in that moment. But within hours of witnessing his daughter's beach day embarrassment, he and his writing partner Lee Pockris had completed the entire track. Sometimes the best ideas arrive fully formed. Sometimes a toddler's shyness becomes a #1 hit. The song captured something essential about early 60s innocence. It was playful without being suggestive. It was catchy without being complicated. And it introduced millions of listeners to the concept of the bikini at a time when such swimwear was still considered daring. Brian Hyland was barely old enough to drive, but he had delivered one of the defining novelty hits of the new decade. Number 9, Hello Muda, Hello Fada. Number 9 takes us to the summer of 1963, and a comedian named Alan Sherman who turned childhood misery into comedy gold.
He sat me down in the desert sand with a comb and scissors in his hand. As he cut my hair, he said, "I'm the best, the fastest barber in the West."
To picture millions of American kids preparing to head off to summer camp while a song climbs the charts, describing camp as a disaster zone of biblical proportions. The timing could not have been more perfect or more cruel. Sherman wrote the song in the voice of a miserable camper desperate to come home. He borrowed the melody from a classical ballet by Ponchielli and filled it with complaints that escalated from inconvenient to catastrophic. Fellow campers were going missing. Food poisoning was spreading. Bears were appearing. The weather was terrible. The counselors were useless. And the kid was begging, pleading, practically screaming for his parents to rescue him from this nightmare. Here is the detail that makes the song more than just a joke. Sherman based it on actual letters his son Robert sent home from Camp Champlain in upstate New York. The complaints were real. The homesickness was real. Sherman simply amplified everything to absurd proportions, turning genuine childhood anxiety into something parents could laugh about. Then, in the final verse, the sun comes out, and suddenly, camp is wonderful. Never mind that letter. Kindly disregard this letter. The song hit number 2 on the Billboard chart in late August 1963, blocked from the top spot only by Stevie Wonder and then the Angels. Sherman won a Grammy for the recording. In 2019, the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Recording Registry, an honor usually reserved for serious musical achievements. Sherman became the king of song parody, paving the way for artists like Weird Al Yankovic decades later. But he never quite matched the success of that summer camp letter. Number 8. Monster Mash. At number 8 is the Halloween anthem that refuses to die. In October 1962, a struggling actor named Bobby Pickett had an idea that every major record label thought was ridiculous.
Ladies and gentlemen, back for the second go-around of the one that was so popular not too long ago, a thing called the Monster Mash. Ladies and gentlemen, again, Mr. Bobby Pickett.
He had been doing impressions of Boris Karloff in his nightclub act. What if he turned that impression into a song about monsters throwing a dance party? Pickett recorded it with producer Gary Paxton at a small studio with almost no budget. They got creative with sound effects out of necessity. The coffin opening was actually a rusty nail being pulled from a board. The bubbling cauldron was water blown through a straw. The rattling chains were just chains dropped on a tile floor. Every major label passed on the track. They thought it was too silly, too weird, too uncommercial. Paxton believed in it anyway and released it on his own small label. Within weeks, Monster Mash was everywhere. On October 20th, 1962, it hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 2 weeks, perfectly positioned right before Halloween. The BBC banned it for being too morbid, which only made it more popular everywhere else. The song sold over 1 million copies that first year alone. But here is the remarkable part. Monster Mash kept coming back from the dead, just like the creatures it celebrated. It charted again in 1970, reaching number 91. Then, in 1973, it climbed all the way back to number 10. The song has returned to the charts multiple times since then, haunting the Halloween season year after year. See, as of 2023, Monster Mash was still generating $1 million annually in royalties. Not bad for a joke song recorded in an afternoon with homemade sound effects. Number 7. They're Coming to Take Me Away. Ha ha! Number 7 might be the strangest commercial success in pop music history. In 1966, a recording engineer named Jerry Samuels created a track that broke every rule of what a hit song should be. There was no melody, no harmony, not a single musical note. Just a relentless snare drum, a voice growing faster and more manic with each verse, and a police siren wailing in the background. The narrator appears to be experiencing a complete mental breakdown. He is thrilled that men in white coats are coming to take him to the funny farm. As the song progresses, the tempo increases, his voice speeds up, and the mania intensifies. Samuels recorded it under the name Napoleon XIV, using a variable frequency oscillator to create that unsettling vocal acceleration. To avoid being completely tasteless, he added a final twist. The narrator is not addressing a woman. He is talking to his runaway dog. The song exploded to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped the Cashbox chart. Sales hit 1 million copies almost immediately. Some radio stations found it too disturbing and pulled it within weeks. The controversy only made it more popular. A burst of insanity that proved audiences craved something that shattered the rules. Number 6. Dominique. At number 6 is the most unlikely chart topper in American history. The circumstances surrounding its success are so strange, so perfectly timed, that they almost feel scripted by a higher power. But America was still reeling from President Kennedy's assassination. The nation had lost its young, vibrant leader just weeks earlier. The country needed comfort, something pure, something simple, something that could cut through the grief and offer a moment of peace. And that is exactly what arrived from the most unexpected source imaginable. Sister Luc Gabrielle was a 30-year-old Belgian nun who enjoyed playing guitar and writing songs at her convent. Her fellow sisters loved her music and suggested she record an album. So in 1963, she made a collection of simple religious folk songs, all sung in French. The lead single was called Dominique, a tribute to Saint Dominic, the founder of her religious order. It was gentle. It was sincere. It was sung in a language most Americans did not understand. On December 7th, 1963, Dominique hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It stayed there for 4 consecutive weeks, becoming the first Belgian recording and the first song sung entirely in French to top the American charts. A Nun had outsold every rock and roll artist, every pop star, every established name in the music industry. Hollywood made a movie about her life starring Debbie Reynolds in 1966. But Sister Luc Gabrielle's story did not have a happy ending. She left the convent, struggled with taxes on royalties that had gone to the church, and tragically took her own life in 1985. But in that moment, in late 1963, Dominique was exactly what the world needed to hear. Sometimes a simple song arrives at exactly the right moment and becomes something much larger than itself. In number 5, Winchester Cathedral. Number 5 features a songwriter who was so tired of modern pop music that he decided to write something from 40 years earlier. The year was 1966. The Beatles were revolutionizing rock. Motown was dominating the soul. And British songwriter Jeff Stevens wanted nothing to do with any of it. He wanted to make something that sounded like it belonged in the 1920s music hall era. The result was Winchester Cathedral, a song about heartbreak sung through a cheap megaphone with a jaunty brass band backing. The narrator addresses the famous English cathedral as if it were a therapist, complaining that his girl has left him standing alone. The vocal effect came from singing through an actual megaphone, giving it that tiny, vintage, crackling sound that belonged to another era entirely. Stevens recorded it with session musicians and released it under the name The New Vaudeville Band. Here is the problem. No such band actually existed. It was a studio creation, a name attached to a recording that was never meant to require live performances. But the song became a massive hit in America. It reached #1 in December 1966, actually knocking the Supremes off the top spot. After being briefly bumped by the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations for 1 week, it climbed back to #1 for 2 more weeks. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see the New Vaudeville Band perform live. A band that did not exist had to be quickly assembled from available musicians just to meet demand. The band was managed by Peter Grant, who would later become famous as Led Zeppelin's legendary manager. They had a few more minor hits. But Winchester Cathedral remained their defining moment. 50 years later, the actual Winchester Cathedral Choir recorded a new version to celebrate the anniversary. An old joke had become a beloved classic. Number 4. The Purple People Eater. At number 4 is a song that technically came out in 1958, but whose influence extended so deeply into the 1960s that it demands inclusion on this list. Written and performed by country singer and actor Sheb Wooley, The Purple People Eater told the bizarre tale of a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple creature that became a cultural phenomenon. Wooley got the idea from a friend's child who had accidentally combined the phrases "purple people" and "man-eater." The songwriter realized the grammatical ambiguity created something wonderful. The creature ate purple people. And it was not a purple creature that ate people. The distinction mattered. It made the song clever instead of just silly. The recording featured Wooley's regular voice alternating with a sped-up voice for the alien, similar to the technique David Seville was using for the chipmunks. The creature wanted to come to Earth not to terrorize humanity, but to join a rock and roll band. It was a perfect novelty concept for the emerging rock era, making fun of the new music while celebrating it at the same time. Released in June 1958, the song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 6 weeks. That is longer than most serious songs of the era managed. It sold over 3 million copies and became one of the biggest hits of the year. The influence lasted throughout the following decade. In 1966, there was even a movie based on it starring Shelley Winters. Children's books, toys, and merchandise followed. Wooley himself was a successful character actor who appeared in dozens of Western films and television shows. He had another novelty hit in 1962 with That's My Pa, but nothing ever matched his one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple creation. Number 3. Surfin' Bird. Number 3 is pure chaos, compressed into 2.5 minutes of audio insanity. In late 1963, a garage band from Minneapolis called the Trashmen were playing a gig when their drummer Steve Warrer did something spontaneous that would change their lives forever. He mashed together 2 R&B songs by the Rivingtons, Papa Mau Mau and The Bird's the Word, into one wild, frenetic, barely coherent performance. The result was Surfin' Bird, a song that made absolutely no sense and did not care. It combined the choruses from both stolen songs into a surf rock explosion, where the only real lyrics were repeated phrases about the bird. A local DJ named Bill Deal was at that show and immediately saw potential in the madness. He convinced the band to record it at a small Minneapolis studio. Released in November 1963, the song was an instant sensation. It reportedly sold 30,000 copies in the Twin Cities alone during the first weekend. By January 1964, it had peaked at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, spending 2 weeks at that position. The Rivingtons, who wrote the original songs, threatened to sue for plagiarism. The credits were changed to include them, and they began receiving royalties. This turned out to be a financial windfall, as the song has been used in countless movies, television shows, and commercials over the decades. Surfin' Bird became a garage rock classic that influenced punk bands in the 1970s. The Ramones covered it. The Cramps covered it. In 2008, it gained a whole new generation of fans when it was featured prominently in an episode of Family Guy where Peter Griffin became obsessed with it. The Trashmen never had another major hit. They disbanded in 1967. But Surfin' Bird lives on as one of the most gleefully nonsensical rock songs ever recorded. Proof that sometimes making sense is overrated. Number 2, Alley Oop at number 2 is a novelty song about a caveman that became an unlikely chart topper in 1960. Alley Oop was based on the popular comic strip character created by V.T. Hamlin in 1932. And the song imagined this prehistoric strongman as a rock and roll hero, riding his dinosaur, swinging his club, and being the toughest man in history. Songwriter and producer Kim Fowley wrote it with Gary Paxton, the same Gary Paxton who would later produce Monster Mash. They created the Hollywood Argylls specifically for this recording, assembling session musicians to cut the track. The song had that classic early 60s sound with hand claps, group vocals, and a driving beat. Female backing vocals provided responses to the lead singer's boasts about the prehistoric hero. Released in May 1960, it climbed rapidly up the charts. By July, Alley Oop had reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 1 week. It also hit #1 on the R&B charts, showing its crossover appeal. But the success created an unexpected problem. The Hollywood Argyles did not actually exist as a real band. They were a studio creation, a name attached to a recording made by anonymous session musicians. When demand for live performances came flooding in, they had to quickly assemble different lineups of musicians to tour under the name. Several groups claiming to be the Hollywood Argyles toured simultaneously, each with completely different members. The confusion eventually led to lawsuits and disputes over who had the right to use the name. The comic strip's popularity, combined with the catchy song, created a brief alley-oop craze in 1960. But like most novelty hits, the moment passed quickly. The Hollywood Argyles had one more minor chart entry, but never recaptured that initial magic. To #1, Ahab the Arab. Coming in at #1 is the song that established Ray Stevens as the undisputed king of novelty music. In 1962, years before his massive 1970s success with The Streak, Stevens released Ahab the Arab and proved that comedy songs could be sophisticated in production while remaining gloriously silly in content. Stevens wrote and performed the entire track himself, telling the story of Ahab, the sheik of the burning sands, and his trusty camel named Clyde. Together, they pursued the fairest maiden in all the land. What made the song irresistible was Stevens's total commitment to the absurdity. He created distinct voices for each character, packed the track with unexpected sound effects, and built an exotic musical bed that elevated the comedy to something genuinely impressive. Released in September 1962, Ahab the Arab climbed to #5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold over 1 million copies. Stevens followed up with similar novelty tracks throughout the decade, refining his craft until he perfected it in the 1970s. But fans from the 60s never forgot where the magic started. A sheik named Ahab, a camel named Clyde, and a songwriter who understood that making people laugh was an art form worth mastering. The screen darkens. A low, tense hum pulses beneath fleeting images of records and crowds. Some songs were never meant to last, yet decades later, they endure. They remind us that joy and absurdity are essential. But if the jokes survive, what other secrets are hiding in plain sight, waiting to reshape what we think we know? The hum swells and cuts. A single echo lingers as the screen fades to black.